Welcome to our Indie-stry chat. The members of Bloodhound Pix and an occasional guest give their no BS experiences with current aspects of the industry. Hi, so this is going to be a special episode for me because the first legitimate interview I ever did was with Staten Cousins Roe and his wife Poppy while we were talking about A Serial Killer's Guide to Life. So to have him back on is great, and we chat about a lot of kind of amazing things about the future of cinema for independent filmmakers and a ton of other wonderful topics. So listen and enjoy. Hey, Staten, thank you for joining me on this episode.
A real pleasure.
So, I just wanted to, get started and tell everyone how you got started and what brought you to becoming a actor and then a filmmaker.
Yeah, sure. So, I started I started as an actor originally. I think. None of my family were filmmakers or were sort of connected to the industry at all. And so growing up, I was a huge film fan and watching movies that I really shouldn't have at a young age, like RoboCop and Alien and stuff, probably at like the age of like 11 or 12 or something like that. And the emotional scars are still there. Growing up, I had this notion of wanting to tell stories, and I'd do the typical thing of making movies with my dad's camcorder and stuff. But I think for some reason in my mind, because it was the people I could see were the actors, and I didn't. Although I was making movies with a camcorder, I was also sort of being in them as well, and so some part of me was like, to make movies, you should be an actor. And so, I connected to Shakespeare and really started to enjoy the rhythm of the language and everything, and speaking out loud and being in school plays and things. So I went along that route, and I went to drama school here in the UK, and then but I'd always had even at sort of an early age, at the age of 17 or whatever, this notion in mind of producing and directing one day, but I kind of pushed it along the line, like I needed to do to sort of experience a lot more before I felt able to kind of engage on that level. But while sort of simultaneously always writing alongside that, always writing some bit of a screenplay or helping a friend write a screenplay for his screenwriting degree, and it kind of connected in with my acting. Writing some material to then perform, and so that took me to London. I was born on the south coast, but I had drama schools that I auditioned for and everything were in London. So I moved to London, and then learned acting. And again, there was always this sort of connection with the writing and how the stories were made and the structure behind them. And meanwhile, I carried on consuming huge quantities of movies, and I'm really wanting to learn at that stage kind of screen technique from an acting perspective. So I started this kind of scrapbook where I noted down different screen techniques that I was seeing in people like Robert De Niro and Dustin Hoffman, and in some of their great movies, and kind of building up a kind of homemade textbook of what I thought these actors were doing. But it was interesting because I was doing that all through the screen, all through rather than necessarily the theatre. And I was sort of trying to break down what the difference was between the two mediums. And anyway, that all then I acted. I came out of drama school, and I did some television and some a lot of independent films, and also theatre. And one of the indie films that I played the lead in as an actor, which was a lovely film called Drawn. I worked with the producer and the director on that, two lovely guys, and we did a lot of filming for it, and it came together really well. But towards the end, as sometimes happens with indie films, I think people sort of ran out of steam, and so during the editing process, there was no money really left and things like that. It all kind of ground to a halt, and so I came on board as a sort of quasi-producer to just try and push the whole thing through. And in doing that, I managed to get the film into a number of things for the UK sort of film market, and then got the film picked up by a sales agent and got it sold, and it played at the National Film Theatre in the UK. And that was one of my sort of proudest moments up to that point. Wasn't actually seeing my face as the lead in it, but was really taking control behind the scenes and pushing the thing along and making it happen from a business side as well. And after that, I then I produced with my wife Poppy Rowe a short film for the director of that of Drawn, and produced that. And then after that same year, I had some time because I was acting in a theatre show. So I thought perhaps it was time to kind of knuckle down with my own desire to direct. And I went ahead and wrote a short film called This Way Out while I was doing the stage show in the evening. And then finally went ahead and kind of put my money where my mouth was, as it were, and actually directed my first film, short film. And so that was kind of the trajectory in a way, at least to the beginning of filmmaking for me. And it kind of took that movement from acting through to finally being the one at the monitor.
Yeah. No, and I've written about it, but I love This Way Out, and talked a little bit about it before, but I know, I actually wanted to ask about, especially since, this podcast is out of the States, and what always really fascinated me was, because I went to drama school as well, and then film school and all that, but in the UK there's more, I felt like there's always been more crossover from theater to television to film, where a lot of times here it's like, you can kind of do them all, but it's like inevitably it's like you either go to Los Angeles and do one, or go to New York and do the other. You can't really, there's not that mix sometimes. That's what it feels like when you're like coming up. And I'd love to kind of hear about
Yeah, absolutely. I totally hear that. It's really interesting the way that you mentioned, I think in part perhaps that just from you saying it sounds like the geographical problem of the two industries in the US being on completely opposite sides of what is a very large country, and to flip between the two, although is possible, it's not easy or financially viable for many. And whereas in the UK, London, is the hub for both, or certainly has been for up until now. Having said that, there are still niches that people go into, and so inevitably, if you build up a big CV in one but have not very much in another, it's simply, I think, a practical thing of certain casting directors or industry people that work in one don't necessarily work in the other thing, and so you tend to have to build up. But I think it's certainly much more varied than what you mentioned. I think as well, perhaps it's because the history of theatre here is what it is, and I think with drama schools, although they're starting to more, their focus is still utterly and completely on theatre, on learning to act in theatre. And I think the core is right. If you are a superb theatre actor, you will still be a brilliant screen actor if you connect to the truth of the moment. And so, yes, I think that also there's again, thinking about the geographical, since a lot of the studios that are in the UK are still based just on the outskirts of London. Having said that, there is a move to try and move it more spread across the country now. But it's certainly, from my perspective, I enjoyed moving between the mediums. I think to learn as much as possible from a directorial point of view as well.
I agree completely. So after your short film, then the process of getting, which is kind of how we first started talking about, is your first feature, A Serial Killer's Guide to Life, which you ended up utilizing some of the resources from the short and some of the tonal stylings as well. I'd like to kind of talk about that process.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you touched on a really valuable point there in terms of after making This Way Out, which has the same two lead actors, Poppy Rowe and Casey Braben, doing wonderful chemistry, having wonderful chemistry on screen. I was working on a different screenplay, which I thought might be my first feature film. And then, but always in the back of my mind, I had in mind I really wanted to try and utilise Poppy and Katie's chemistry in a longer form than just the short. And the short film's about, This Way Out's about a struggling euthanasia centre, a darkly comic film. And I just felt like euthanasia wasn't quite the right topic to roll out into a longer form. Yeah. And I wanted to find a different world, as it were, to house those two characters in a longer form. Having said that, I think I like the idea of This Way Out in a TV version. Mm-hmm. But so then I came across the idea of A Serial Killer's Guide to Life, the world of self-help, and satirising that with two similar, not the same, but similar character types for the two actors. And you're absolutely right. It was very much about looking at the way we'd done This Way Out, completely homemade, as it were. That was shot in our flat in London at the time, and literally, our joint hallway was filled with camera equipment after asking the neighbours if it would be okay, and we made the food in the night before for the cast and crew, so that when they turned up, at lunchtime, they could all eat. And then looking at how well it turned out and how it went around the whole world and won awards, and we sold it to HBO and the Sundance Channel in Europe and things. So it was a real buzz to think of something you make, completely in your own home and then share with the world. Yeah. So we looked at how we could do the same thing, really, and just sort of scale it up. And so we did. We used as many people as we could from the original production, This Way Out, in A Serial Killer's, and just kind of tried to do exactly that and scale everything up, but keeping that homegrown feeling and vibe, and in doing so, obviously, on a practical level, keeping the budget minusculely low, even for a micro budget film.
What was the process after completing it? Did the short help in finding distribution, or did you have to? What was the festival circuit like? And in this, we kind of, the podcast itself, we'll go a little bit into the process of somebody trying to go through festival runs and things like that. And so, how was that whole process?
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. I think what This Way Out was interesting for was and useful for was when we were in pre-production, and just before that for A Killer's Guide, we were able to send people who hadn't worked with us before the short as a way of sort of saying, along with other information, as a way of saying, this is what we made before, that we made it in this way, here's an example, a calling card. And that worked really well. Yeah. And some of the people we brought on board to produce the film, Charity Wakefield and Giles Alderson, along with Poppy and I, they were then able to use that for some of their contacts. I remember Charity sending it out to various cast members or people that she knew as a way of saying, look, I know you trust me, but, look what these guys did before. This is going to be really cool. And so that was really helpful. And I think, from the festival perspective, obviously right now, as we talk about it, it's incredibly unusual and almost impossible to predict what's going to happen with the festival world as we're in the middle of the pandemic and which ones will survive financially and everything like that. But certainly prior to now, This Way Out went to a lot of different festivals. With A Serial Killer's Guide to Life, we were lucky in the sense that we got distribution. We set up distribution with the wonderful Arrow Films prior to its festival launch. And so Arrow were very instrumental in helping us plan where they felt the film should premiere. And then also we were planning the release dates. And so that sort of gave us a very small amount of time after its Fright Fest world premiere as to where was available for it to go before it then released in the UK. Yeah. And then we also went to a Fantastic Fest in Australia. So the festival run was a bit different with that than it was with this fair. With the short, you're sort of just free to do what you want with it because it's a different kind of distribution world, as it were. But I think festivals are, it's really important. One of the really key things from a filmmaker perspective we learned with the short was having a festival strategy and knowing where we wanted the film to open, why we wanted it to open there, why that festival matched the film, and ensuring that we would enter that festival ahead of another festival that if we got into might blow the premiere, the world premiere, the local premiere, you have to be really aware of using that premiere, particularly the world premiere and then your home premieres, using it very wisely. Okay. If you go and open with a feature film in one festival and then another one wants it and they're much bigger, but you've already used up the premiere, then it may well cost you that opportunity.
So that actually brings up a great little quick question that we haven't covered is the differences between what necessarily would make deem a world premiere versus a home premiere. And is it a world premiere or something that is just purely out of an international film festival, or?
I see. Yeah, I think normally you can, and it depends on the festival. The home premiere tends to be literally where your film was made. So for us, it would be the UK. Yeah. Your world premiere is generally the first time it's ever shown anywhere in the world. Okay. But some festivals will allow you to do screen it at your home nation and still retain your kind of world premiere. It's like if we screened in the UK and then screened in the States, depending on the festival, it would still kind of say it was still the world premiere, and then you still, after that, you've got your North American premiere, your European premiere. But the safest way with the top tier, the sort of tier A festivals, is to try is to ensure you keep it so that's the very first world screening. And also in terms of trying to generate buzz and distribution hype and interest, unveiling your film in that way.
No,
it's the best. I mean, obviously that doesn't connect into how you get to that into that festival and all of that kind of stuff. But
like I said, it's a kind of topic that we always forget to kind of really discuss, and so it's great that it finally was able to be utilized, I guess, to be able to talk about it. So I'd actually like to go back. It's one of my favorite topics to talk about, and it's a kind of one of those tricky issues in the States because we have it, but not as much. But both of the short and then a Serial Killer's Guide to Life, I know you were talking about the last time we spoke on future projects, having kind of this tone a little bit as well of black comedy. And I think it's one of those things that in the UK, it's very well known, and I love it anytime I see it. But then in the States, there's this weird, it's either sometimes seen as too mean or...
Absolutely. I think there's, black comedy, dark comedy, it's a really from a filmmaking and writing perspective, it's a really interesting tool to use because you can investigate, big sort of intellectual things while also having fun and it not being dry. I think that there's always been the notion of gallows humour, which is definitely very inbuilt in the British sensibility and the British sense of humour. But I also think it is something which most humans in some form, whatever culture, possess, because it's a defense system to try and love, maybe that's uncomfortable or terrible at times. And it's interesting because I think, some of the films when I was growing up, I grew up watching a lot of sort of dark comedy, dark humour, odd things, and obviously this Monty Python has a lot of very unusual comedy. But actually, two of the films that I watched that had a big impact in that sense were American films. They were Hal Ashby's Harold and Maude, which is a very dark dark sort of theme of comedy and humor in it. Have you seen it?
Yes, it's one of my wife's favorites. That we watch it probably at least once a year. I don't know. I love the movie. It's beautiful to me, at least.
It's a remarkable movie, and it's brilliant, and it's unsettling and uncomfortable and touching all at the same time. And I mean, I watched that. My grandma, I can't remember why, but used to stick that on all the time, and I watched it with her loads. And my gran had she was a nurse, and she had a fabulously dark sense of humour. And the other one is, of course, Dr. Strangelove, which, you can't get much darker than joking about nuclear winter, especially at a time when it was seen as being completely possible and perhaps likely when it was made.
Well, they
two American movies.
They pushed the date back of release or something because of what was going on in the world, if I remember correctly. It's like right after Kennedy assassination too.
So yeah, you're right. It's interesting that kind of comedy, I think, does exist there. But and I've noticed it in recent years. It's coming out, and I think audiences are really enjoying it in all different types of genre. When you think of Breaking Bad, it's got some, so many moments of absolutely black humour. And it's a fabulous tool because you can really open an audience up and make them vulnerable, and then slam it, sort of knock them between the eyes and have them laughing at the same time as reeling. I enjoy it as a viewer, as an audience member. I love watching something, whether it have a moment of it or it be completely satirical or whatever. And so and that's why I enjoyed using it in this way out, and Serial Killer's Guide to Life.
So I guess what I'd like to talk about, I know you especially with these last two and moving forward, you created your own company with your wife, Poppy, who, for those of you that are listening that haven't seen The Serial Killer's Guide to Life, she's amazing in it, and I will rave all day about her work. But so what's that like in the process of creating that company and then having that kind of partnership and both professional and personal?
It's been great. I mean, we edited the film together as well, which is obviously a very intimate process as well, and it works. It's really enjoyable. I mean, without sounding too corny or whatever, it's great because it means I get to spend a lot of time, working with one of my best friends as well. And also there's a sort of trust element there where you really learn each other's strengths and weaknesses creatively. And we have two children, so in a way it's fairly easy to switch off when we're not working because we're dealing with the chaos of family life. And another way it's like both of us clamour to be the one, that's dealing with the creative or the business elements, because it's if anyone with a young family is listening, they'll know it's anything else is a kind of rest. Any kind of work is a kind of rest. So it's been great. I mean, it was kind of typified by the fact that when the film Serial Killer's Guide to Life premiered, at its festival premiere, world premiere, Poppy was heavily pregnant with our second child. And he actually was born. He was born a few hours before the premiere, so she ended up having to miss it. And so I literally left the hospital and went straight to the Leicester Square in London for the Fight Fest premiere. And there was no other way of sort of like saying how closely connected we both were with the film and my family being that he was born pretty much just a few hours before. So it's fun, and we've recently started a great scheme in the UK. It's called the British Independent Film Awards, and we've just started with them. They've selected us with a number of people for a thing called BIFA Springboard, which is to help give advice and things and sort of mentorship with different, more experienced parts of the industry for our second or third film. And so that's nice because Poppy could go to Thank you. Poppy could go on something like that, or or I can, and then we can chat about it at home, sort of over dinner, and so you get this very, it means things can continue all the time. Whereas with a normal business partner or whatever, you obviously can't have that level of flexibility of communication.
And so with your forward motion picture, I think, especially for, I guess, even talking about the horror industry for a second, even though since we'll kind of delve into that with this podcast, there's been a lot of, in the film industry in general, there's been a lot of talk about inclusion. And I know part of your kind of mission statement is really making sure that you have, that it's not just all men on cast, and that you have a lot of women involved in really bringing inclusion into all of your productions.
Yeah, it was something that came about very early on, actually, a long time before the kind of international, which we're very happy that this has happened, but before it was sort of something that was really spoken about all the way back with This Way Out and things, and it was really it was mostly to do with, it was something I noticed as an actor at the time, was just, it seemed odd that there would, at that time, and it's changed an awful lot already, at that time be so many, it was just literally guys in every single role, other than a couple of the stereotypical ones. And we're going back, 15 years or so now. And what it meant was it was an odd kind of atmosphere. It wasn't perhaps as open an atmosphere. And I went to a boys' school growing up, and there was a certain atmosphere, and it was just all lads. It was fine, but it wasn't necessarily conducive to the most open environment. Yeah. And obviously, that's talking in a very stereotypical way, but it just seemed to make sense from a story perspective, and to have a balanced notion of ideas coming in from people. I like to have the thought that everyone on set can have a thought about anything and an idea about something. And so we worked to just try and have the best people at all times, and a range of people with different perspectives. And that's started with This Way Out, and carried on with A Serial Killer's Guide to Life, and will carry on in the future.
Well, wonderful. And I guess that goes into a great discussion about the 2020 pandemic that we're facing and how it's kind of shaping the industry. So how do you think, personally, your own work and your own company moving forward, but also the industry as a whole, is going to move forward? And is there ever really going to be, I guess, backtracking to how it was prior? Or are we just kind of at this point of no return?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's one of those things where I've always liked to try and think ahead about what trends were coming, and whether that be story-wise or whatever. And it's if there was ever a point where it's a state of flux was the phrase, it's now, to state the obvious. I think for my 2 pence worth, is that I think when change happens, and people, like you just said about people recognizing that they can be in different places, use Zoom and or Skype or whatever, work from home, it's easy and it works and it has a purpose and a value. I think things don't often go backwards, once people have evolved to change. And so from that point of view, I think what a lot of the changes that happen probably won't go backwards, partly because perhaps some of the businesses that were there won't be. I think the notion of cinema is certainly, until there's a vaccine, is going to be obviously tough. And also the notion of smaller films playing in cinemas, unless there's a content problem, unless there's not enough content coming through, I sort of see a time where it literally is, and this was already happening, it literally is only really the massive $100-200 million spectacles that are in the cinema. And perhaps the demographics that they're aimed at as well. Perhaps those demographics that it was already working for, but the younger ones who feel less concern or less fear about catching pre-COVID. Certainly in the UK, just before the pandemic, there was a really, one of the big growing sectors going to the cinema was what was called the grey market, the older generation. Yeah. There really was a lot of them, and I'm not certain that for a long time that growing sector, I think, is probably gone. I think that was fueling a lot of the smaller art house cinemas, and that's tricky. But I don't know what do you think is going to happen?
I think I kind of agree with. I talked to recently in a prior interview months ago when it was first kind of happening. As a screenwriter, and he said the same thing for the States, at least, that when we had the writer's strike, that was kind of what they were seeing, not the pandemic, but seeing, with the the internet growing, it's going to kind of be going this way, so we need to find a way to, these companies, we're trying to hold on to, I guess, that old way of life. But no, I think it is really going to be, theater will be, as you were mentioning, the $200,000, $300,000 or $1 million movies, and like in a event film, you have your Marvel, your whatever else, and then everything else seems like it's going online, or even, I know some companies have even talked about how they found it more profitable doing the theatrical release on video on demand. You pay, I think, over here you pay $20 and you get the movie for 48 hours or something like that.
Oh yeah, like The Invisible Man and Hunt and things did. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, and maybe as and when and if there's a vaccine and things, and perhaps there'll be a huge pent-up demand to go back to the theatre, to go to those places. But in a way, I think, as an industry, you kind of have to plan for what the reality is now and work towards that, because it's sort of open-ended right now. There's hope. Yeah. But you have to plan to what's happening now. And I think that's really tough, because a lot of, the cinema market is not just, the theatrical market is not just there to denote how a film does then, but it also, that value, what it does at a box office, translates to what the film is sold, the price that the film is sold for when it goes to the television markets, the ancillary markets. And so sometimes a smaller film would be opened on a theatrical base to help raise its value, or a lot of the time to raise its value further down the distribution chain. And so you have this disruption where then, how do you qualify that your film has a higher value for when you sell it to international TV and the other rights and things, which, although sound complex or perhaps convoluted, they really matter to the filmmaker, because if you can't show the value of your film, you can't raise the budget of your film, and you can't make your film.
No, that's a great discussion. I know that's been, especially over here, there's been that issue with the middle class of filmmaking basically being obsolete, where it's, you have your either tentpole movies, or you have these films that they're, wanting to shoot for less than 10 million, or even, lesser than that. There's really no middle ground anymore.
Yeah, I would say less than 1 million now. Yeah. I think 10 million is now sort of seen as fairly sizable, budget, in terms of like you said, as soon as you're outside the tentpole movies, the budget is drops hugely.
For a long time, that's how that the middle film range was kind of how people made their ends meet, I guess. And so now what happens is kind of the big question.
Yeah, and it's a shame for actors as well. I mean, there's a lot of actors who I've noticed that I don't see in movies anymore, or very rarely, because those middle films were where stars were made and huge careers were built, and without them, those actors don't become the names that they would have become. And so the whole value system, because it used to be that you use the names to help raise the budget of the film, that value chain for proving value of the movie starts to break down. And it's why, along with the fact that I think the value of films has dropped massively, without sounding too downbeat, because of streamers and things, and people are less inclined to pay for a film now. They want to wait till it's on Netflix. So it's it's a very, along with the pandemic and everything, I think it's that thing where these are all trends that were happening, but the pandemic, I think, has just sped it up quite dramatically. And so it's going to take real innovation. I'm one that I always feel that when there's change happens, there's always opportunity.
Yeah.
But it's just going to take a bit of thinking to work out what that opportunity is.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. And I think because I know, Poppy, she was just in a theatrical, I forgot how it was phrased now off the top of my head, but where they shot it on Zoom, but it was a period piece. It wasn't just like some, a Zoom horror movie.
Yeah, that's right. It was a play of a best-selling novel by Sebastian Faulks called Birdsong, which was set in the Somme, the First World War battle. Yeah, and that was wonderfully innovative. And worked brilliantly, and got, over here in the UK, got coverage from all of the large newspapers and large media coverage and 5-star reviews. And I have to say, it was a truly remarkable piece of work. I watched it and was blown away by what was created. And that kind of innovation is exactly it. Like you said, that's making things is what creatives do best, and hopefully people can make things with this.
Yeah, it may sound like a downer, but I think I agree completely that there is this positive kind of element of it. I don't know. There's this hope for what can be accomplished with the future, and I think it also, people have talked about it giving other people a voice that normally wouldn't in the older industry.
Yes, yeah. I know. Perhaps in the older model, you could see how there was a value chain there, which I think is breaking down. And so, in terms of sustainable careers, I think it's tougher perhaps now than it ever has been to know how to build a career, and which is ironic, really, because more films are being made, but although there's sort of the VOD, which can handle as many films as ever were made, the channels aren't there to direct people to them. So, you have huge quantity with hardly anyone looking at any of it, apart from these big tentpole things. So, I think from the point of view of filmmaking, it's got to be the same as ever, which is, really focus on making a brilliant story. And I think that's the key is if you make something truly gripping and moving and wonderful and touching, it will rise to the top, along with some sound business thinking behind it as well.
Is there anything that you are working on currently or still through all this? I know that last time we spoke, you were both finally writing together a feature.
Yeah, that's right. So we're because there's this kind of hiatus at the moment in terms of obviously being able to make things, and it's hard to know when, certainly with long format, when that will be possible again in terms of practical things like insurance and stuff. I know commercials and things are starting because they're a bit shorter and stuff, but and the very large stuff's able to finance what's involved. But so we that project's coming along really well, actually. We're really excited about that. Oh. And then we're also, simultaneously we've got Carrying, which we're writing together. And we're sort of thinking, could, rather than be my next film, could even be Poppy's first directorial feature, which would be really exciting. We're in two minds at the moment, and that I'd produce and she direct on that. And also we're developing a TV version of A Serial Killer's Guide to Life, which we're really excited about. Yeah, so that would be really cool. And we're also I'm also working on another script as well, a darkly comic sort of satirical horror, which I think it's important these days to be able to be flexible with your ideas and stuff, and I like to just find the world. So at the moment it's a feature film, but I could also see that working as a TV series as well. So
I know this is kind of how a lot of people have gone lately, as even for myself, I think there's certain ideas creatively that started off as a feature that have now even found themselves it went to like a television series, then a web series, then it'd be fun to just do a little short, and it's definitely trying to map that all out now.
Yes, yeah.
I'm excited to see what both of you bring next. And actually, because we've talked about a few movies, but always like to encourage people to, go see some piece of obscure cinema or independent cinema. And so is there any kind of obscure movie that you always champion that you'd like to, I guess, give a recommendation for?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Well, there's my film, Serial Killer's Guide to Life, which you can get on, which you can watch on Amazon Video and iTunes, etc. And I'd love to hear what people think of that.
Yeah.
Also, I was thinking about this when you...
Oh, no, I was just saying I purchased it on Amazon, and it's rewatched it. My wife loves it too. And she's not a big horror fan, but I think there's enough of like the British black comedy and all of that she really loves it. Yeah.
Thanks, mate. Thanks. And I think actually it's really important. Is that I think what people don't realise, is how important it is that we all buy, even if it's to pay to rent or own independent and small films, because you buying it, that makes such a massive difference. Because the numbers these days of people actually doing that are really tiny compared to how they were, and unless we do all go and pay to rent and pay to download films, they really won't. Our favourite new filmmakers really won't be able to make another film, or when they do, it will be ridiculously small. And we all want to work it. We're talking on the podcast with people that want to make films. They want to be, there won't be much of an industry left to work in if we don't all support it, especially during a time like this with the pandemic. So, so thank you for that. I really appreciate you doing that. And I think, sort of small films that I champion. Well, I know there's a friend of mine, an actor friend, who I haven't seen the film yet, but it's just coming out. I don't know if it's in the US. I think it certainly will be coming out in the US. It's coming out on iTunes and things, and that's called Around the Sun, which looks really cool. But then there's this really obscure one, because I saw you were going to ask me this question, and I saw, and this is I don't even know if you'll be able to get this. Anymore, but it's called Robin Redbreast, and it was originally in about 1970 in the UK on the BBC did what they call Play for Today, and it's this really brilliant little folk horror, and it's a remarkable little film. You can't believe that it was made on such a tiny budget for British television back in the day. And that, if you like horror and folk horror, it's a real find. Robin Redbreast.
Yeah, I'll definitely search them out and try to see if I can find them.
Have you seen that? Have you seen Robin Redbreast?
No, I haven't. I feel like I've heard the name for some
reason. You're a massive horror fan, aren't you?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've heard the name. For some reason it sounds familiar, but I have not watched it. You definitely check it out. Okay. Thank you so much. And of course, it's been so much a pleasure to be able to talk to you again. And how can people kind of find you, or on social media, or your company, or?
Yeah, if anyone has. Yeah, exactly. If anyone has questions and things about filmmaking, for what it's worth, for everyone's an expert these days, and I don't profess to be an expert, but having made a feature film and had it distributed across the world and stuff and all that stuff, please do get in touch, ask questions on Twitter and things. And so I'm on Twitter at Staten CR, and Poppy is at Poppy Roe, ROE. Or at FM Pictures, or at The Killer's Guide, any of those, and follow us, and we'll follow you back. And I think we're on Instagram as well. And the website for A Serial Killer's Guide to Life is aserialkillersguidetolife.com, and there's lots of links and stuff on there, and ways to watch the movie. And I mean, it'd be great, if people watch the movie and then ask any questions about how it was made, or from their point of view as filmmakers. I think the film, from a filmmaker's perspective, from an up and coming filmmaker's perspective, is a really interesting thing to watch, because the way we made it, I feel, is a way that anybody could make a feature film. You know, we used locations that were although it was 28 locations in 10 days we shot the film. I think anyone could do it. We you know, the way we made it happen. So yeah, I'd be really interested to hear what fellow filmmakers think of it, and any questions that anyone has.
Yeah, and I would kind of even, I guess, piggyback off of that. You know, what can really show a film's worth is that, like, if it's you know, low budget or independent, is that it plays, you know, as a higher budget filmer. And I think you were able to accomplish that with A Serial Killer's Guide to Life, where it doesn't at no point it feels like that budget or independent aspect or any of that stuff ever, you know, hinders it, which I think is wonderful. Yeah.
Oh, thanks. Really appreciate it.
No problem at all. Yeah. So yeah, and I guess thank you for chatting with me, and, you know, talking a lot about kind of the schematics and everything. It's been a real pleasure.
Anytime, real pleasure. Always good to talk.
Yeah. Thank you for listening to this episode with Staten Cousins Roe. He wanted me to add on afterwards that for any filmmakers listening that would be interested in the process behind A Serial Killer's Guide to Life, the iTunes version has a 50-minute making-of documentary associated with the film.
Bloodhound Pix podcast is produced by Josh Lee, Craig Draheim, and Kyle Hintz. Music by Raymond Seed. Audio editing by Kyle Hintz.